especially by some of the more black elites, people, the Obama-esque sort of people who have been able to really position themselves as pioneers of blackness to the point where us in the African continent feel like that's what we need to aspire to, that's what we need to become. It became a huge conversation when Black is King was released, the project that Beyonce had with African collaborators, but it was Beyonce's project, and it actually sparked a huge debate this side because I actually think there were more people that supported Beyonce's film across the continent, and more specifically where I am here in South Africa, than were against it. And so I think that there is this idea that to be black, you must aspire to be black American. You even see it in the way people talk and the music that we listen to. If you look at the local hip hop scene here in South Africa, you see a lot of, I need to try and make the same kind of hip hop that I'm hearing in the US. And it's through that I access my blackness. I mean, there's different ways to analyze this. I don't want to spend too much time. One way is, unfortunately, there's a proximity to privilege when you are a Black American in comparison to a Black South African. Indeed, you will still experience the oppression of racism and American empire firsthand, living in American empire. But I still believe that the situation in South Africa, across the African continent, is a whole lot worse. Far less agency, far less ability to even have a voice, to speak out, to say something. I mean, just looking at what you were able to achieve with the George Floyd protests last year, just that phenomenal coming together of Black activists across the United States to continuously push for more rights, is something that, if you were to do in many African countries today, you would have massacres. Quite literally. I mean, you saw that in Nigeria at the Lekki toll gate during the End SARS protest. So not to play oppression Olympics, but I think the ability to organize is so much better in Black America that you're able to attain some kind of status amongst Black people around the world. And our inability to organize, like there are some places where, if you're gay in Africa, you can't even organize a community meeting, right? What you're going to do as that gay activist is you're going to go online and you're going to see Black people in the US who are able to be openly gay. And it's that you get your inspiration from, and that's who you're going to attach your identity to. So, I mean, that's how, as brief as I can be. I think our literal inability to organize here means that we have to find identity among people who are actually functionally organizing. I mean, look at this podcast that you've got going on here, this call, this kind of a conversation. We don't really have spaces like this. And so if there's a lot of South Africans watching a podcast like this is their avenue to consciousness. This is how they become Black again, or become Black in the first place. So I don't know if that's too complicated. Hopefully,
No. You gave.
I'm so sorry, Black. Go for it. I'll come back after.
You gave me, you gave us some thoughts, because I think even when I spent a little time in South Africa, I had some of these conversations. But yeah, it's complicated because on I think that's what I'm hearing on one level is it's structural. So it's not that there's just this inherent ambition, which I think sometimes this American exceptionalism assumes that people just want to be like Americans because they just have that's just a desire people were born with or something. But like you were saying, you're trying to organize, and then that gets repressed, and then you're given what is often controlled. To be honest, what is often controlled opposition over here, because a lot of that George Floyd stuff was bullshit, honestly. But like, so you're given like the image of what we are able to do, and then that gets reversed back, and these things just kind of cycle themselves, right? And and both neither communities are doing well. But you're right, there is a certain proximity to power that Black people in America do have. That's undeniable, and I don't think that I was in your, not to veer off too far, into this conversation, but in your Black America is King piece, we'll put that in the show notes as well. You talked about Black people vote for Biden, and we often support imperialism, right? Like that's just what we do because but again, to our earlier point about even the controlled opposition just in relation to tech, the conversation is always limited just to the states. So we're not even brought up to consider what are the implications of voting for this person for another country. We don't even think about it. It's not even it's not a question. It's not in the conversation. We might be like, well, what are they going to do for the Black community? But we never even ask what is Joe Biden's policy towards You know, what is this policy towards South Africa? What is this policy towards the global South? So all of the stuff you were talking about, even with Obama, like we don't even. I'm saying, just as somebody who lives here, this is not even within. This is not even within the conversation. We don't get it. Our leaders don't talk about it for the most part, unless you're talking to some of the black radicals who are often taken out of the conversation. It's not there, right? So I guess I'm just saying that all of this stuff connects, even when we're talking about tech or just the general politics. How there is a controlled opposition, generally speaking,
Yeah.
that limits the conversation and limits our worldview of how we see things, and creates this dissension that's real, you know, but it's a lot of other structural factors leading into it.
Just to build on, a lot of times we hear so much about, and we have conversations, and by we I mean within conscious circles, and mostly just talking to Two Black all the time. It's just it feels very strange at times to be Black in America, right? And to hear the ways in which, and to acknowledge them because they're real, the ways in which we are privileged in this country in comparison to others, while also acknowledging the ways in which we are still so very censored, right? Two Black talked about how sometimes the conversation is limited because we're literally not told. If you watch any news station in the US, it is very rare that there's even a inkling of foreign things that are being discussed at all, unless it is used for US empowerment, right, from a global capitalistic colonialistic standpoint. So the only time you hear about things that are taking place in the Middle East are when folks are being identified as a terrorist, or when it is so large you cannot ignore it. And even then, the conversation gets spun to where we have to, where when I say we as an Americans, not myself personally, the narrative is then spewed in ways to which you are told to identify with other foreign oppressors, to where the actual oppressed in other countries are then continuously criminalized, right? We talk about, and as two folks up here who cannot stand Barack Obama, you know, there was so much conversation about how this was such a huge win for everyone. This was the first Black leader, as if Black leaders had not existed ever in life, both afar and up close. And so it's also something that's humbling, even when we think of the ways in which we still struggle within our movement, in which protesters are still being arrested and beaten and disappearing and being murdered.
And that's to that. Just a small nugget to that point. Like a lot of, like in Ferguson, for instance, a lot of the protesters in Ferguson disappeared or were killed. But that's what I'm saying. Like that doesn't make it on TV. You see people like getting married at protests on TV or some dumb shit. But like that part where like people in Ferguson are literally gone. Like, so you're talking about, no, it's not on the level of massacres. Like I don't want to play Oppression Olympics either. But a lot of this stuff that does happen to people in the States, you know, COINTELPRO, that stuff doesn't necessarily get exported across the world either. Sorry, Kim. I just wanted to make
that. It's also a humbling experience just listening to you and thinking about the fact that like our ability still within a controlled opposition system, you have to pay for permits to protest and things like that. But even our ability to do so is something that I think often I don't always sit in and think of as huge of a privilege as it is.
Yeah, I guess I agree with you, Black, about there's definitely two different forms of activism that the one that we're seeing and the one that we're not seeing. So what we're not seeing might be genuine struggle against American empire, and because of that, we won't see it. It won't go on Twitter. That person won't become president, etc. So I suppose
I will never be president.
Exactly.
Like my comrades, Hood Communists is a publication. They literally got banned from Twitter. Like just no explanation. Just to bring it all back to tech. They're probably, I know some of them listen to this show. They literally got banned from Twitter and had to go elsewhere. And they had a nice following on Twitter. And it was probably a lot of white so-called leftists that helped get them banned. But that's another conversation. But
yeah, I was following Hood Communist on Twitter. So I suppose you're correct that what we're seeing is actually American exceptionalism in the sense that it's not genuine activists trying to take down American empire. The people who have been promulgated to the top are the exceptionalists. They're
Yeah.
the people that
Yeah.
see themselves as custodians of blackness, as saviors, but not people who actually address the real problem, which is empire. And then, of course, a lot of us this side are learning from them. You know,
Unfortunately, yeah.
It's so interesting. And I'm going to bring this back to digital colonialism, but you mentioned how so many people in South Africa and across the continent, in a lot of ways, look to the US to be able to formulate like for themselves what their blackness means and feels, whereas for so many of us here, we're literally looking to the global South and looking at Africa as our way to find home and to find self. And even my earrings were a gift from someone from Ghana when they came back. And I think of how when we talk about digital colonialism and we talk about the big five and what and how much control they have over that, right? It's not just controlling what is within uh, just software and tech as a whole, but also controlling the narrative. Your school says that, like, you know, you only use Microsoft products because you need them, even though you don't. But because of the way American exceptionalism is formatted, if Americans are using this and they're using it and it's working out well, and we look at Silicon Valley and we talk about how tech has just boomed across the US, then of course elsewhere in places that they view as underdeveloped, then that narrative is going to be spewed. And that is how they continue to create a monopoly of like, well, you have to use this, you need to use this. And then once you are using it, we're stealing all of your information, all of the goods, all the things that you're working on, and all of your data for our own good. And so to bring that full circle, even just thinking of the ways in which the media plays a role through culture, through class, through what is being perpetuated through propaganda, is then being used to continue to fuel digital colonialism in an aspect that then goes back to the plundering of goods, that then goes back to the hyper surveillance of people, the overall collection of data that y'all have been continuously talking about, that's then being used to continuously oppress everyone, right? In South Africa, it looks like we have all of these things, which in some aspects we do, but then in so many aspects we don't, that don't get seen. We don't get to hear or see due to a level of digital censorship of what's taking place in other places. So that way it makes it far more difficult to mobilize on a global level to not only take down big tech, but to take down colonialism and capitalism globally.